Hi, everyone. My name is Maina Garrity, and welcome to the intersection of brand and digital marketing. It's our topic today. We have a really interesting program for you today. And today's webinar is hosted by Be Found Online. Today's speakers, I will have them introduce themselves. We've got Steve Krull and Meg Prejzner.
Hey everybody, Steve Krull, co-founder and CEO of Be Found Online. There's few things I like more than digital marketing. One of them are all the humans in the world. The other are sort of my kids, my family. I have to like them. I like baseball a little bit. I like riding my bicycle, but I do nerd out to the digital marketing space. And I love being on stage with people like Meg who bring me back to reality, who understand the more traditional side of this thing. So I hope you're as excited as I am for this webinar today, because I'm really excited to spend some time with Meg, peppering each other with questions and answers.
Hey guys, I'm Meg. I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that, Steve. I guess I'll give a shout out to my family as well, as I just had a baby girl who's 3 months old. So I'm so proud of that. But I am the founder and CEO of Hackett Brand Consulting, and I, similar to Steve, nerd out on marketing and branding. And I was one of these weird kids that when I was a kiddo, I would love to watch commercials, even more so than cartoons at times. So it only makes sense that I found myself a career in marketing and have started my own agency. And really, Hackett Brand Consulting, we're all about purpose-driven marketing and really helping brands find their purpose, find their mission, and then come to life accordingly through PR, social media, and content marketing. And I'm really grateful to join you, Steve, today to talk about that intersection of brand and digital marketing and how both of those things come together for us.
Great, thank you both. On to today's discussion. So first, we're going to do a quick poll just to learn a little bit more about the audience. And then a special treat, today's webinar will be pardon the interruption style discussion. So I must confess, I had never seen the show, Pardon the Interruption, but for those sports fans, I think you'll kind of know what you're in store for. For those who have never seen it, like myself, it will be a fun timed discussion between Meg and Steve. And we've got a couple topics prepared that they'll kind of go back and forth on. And heads up that there'll be about at the 5-second time, there'll be a little fun bell to kind of get our presenters to kind of close their thoughts. And then at the very end, we've got about 10 minutes for Q&A. So with that, we will turn over the discussion to Meg and Steve.
Perfect. Thanks, Maina. So, I'll kick it off here because we're going to be talking a lot about branding today and really where that fits into the mix with SEO, paid media, PR, social media. But before we dive into kind of how all of those pieces work together, I wanted to take a really big step back and do a little foundation setting for this conversation. And when I say foundation setting, I know that this is something that you do, Steve, with all of your clients before just jumping into SEO or paid media tactics. And that is really looking at the big picture, taking a big step back, seeing a whole view. And before just diving in and getting to work, with any client, it's important to take a step back and look at strategy. And so I'd love to ask the question of you, Steve, to kick things off here is, how do you really define digital marketing and where does that fit into branding for you?
Wow, that's a big, far-reaching question. When I think about digital, I think about, do I have a strategy? What does success look like? Where is success on the horizon? Is it a week, a month, a quarter? Is it a year out? But then I'm also asking the questions, what are we working with in terms of brand? What are we working with in terms of style guides and assets? What do we have to work with? Do we have creative? And is there a brand voice? And should we be leveraging that voice in all of the things that we do? So we try to climb the ladder for our clients. Certainly, you could give me a budget, Meg, and I could go buy clicks, or I could go and target an audience and I could drive them to your site or to a landing page. And there's a pretty good chance that we'll convert. But there's a better chance that we're going to convert if we can climb that ladder and understand from the brand, what is it we're trying to sell? Who is it we're trying to sell it to? And what's the messaging that surrounds that? And I think you'll agree with this, and I'll throw the baton back at you, is this idea that if my messaging is consistent throughout my traditional marketing and my digital marketing, I've got more lift for my brands and my products. It's just the natural occurrence in the way it works. If these things are out of sync, I tend to tick off my users. Even if I have two ads that seem to be competing, I tend to, my click-through rate drops, my conversion rate drops as well, if I'm not close enough to the messaging. So what do you think about that, Meg, in terms of climbing that ladder and the synchronicity, if you will? I used a big word there. Synchronicity, if you will, between the two.
That is a big word, and one that would definitely tongue tie me. So I'll spare repeating it, but for me, I couldn't agree more. So at the heart of everything we do, we start with strategy too. I think that's where we really align, and that is building a brand. And before just diving in, you hit it nail on the head. If you can take kind of this bucket of money and throw ads out there, but to be really successful, you want to start by asking the question of, what is it that we're trying to accomplish here? Start with those goals, but even go a layer back from that and talk about branding. And that is, why do we exist? So if we have these business goals that we're trying to reach, and we know that SEO or paid media can help with that, how do we show up then becomes the question. Why do we exist as a brand? Why are people going to find value in us over any other brand? And one example that I use quite often, and that you've heard, Steve, is the Tom's shoe example. And for me, there's hundreds of shoe brands out there, and ones that are really well established. And so when I think about, why would a brand like Tom's exist? How can they differentiate themselves? And then how can they grow to be this massive company that they've become today? It really starts by peeling back that layer and starting with strategy and thinking about, how do they show up as a brand? And then what type of strategy from a marketing perspective really, brings them to life. And then when they start to work with someone like yourself with SEO and paid media, it really becomes that intersection of digital marketing and paid media and branding that we're talking about today. That you can build a message that exists for your brand, start marketing to an audience that aligns with that message, and come to life there.
So the Tom's shoes example is wonderful, right? Because I can sell shoes, I can go online and I can try to sell you. There's a lot of sneakerheads out there, right? I can try to sell you some Air Jordans, or I can sell you the newest Nikes, or some tennis shoes, or some running shoes. But Tom's has a message that goes along with it. And for a brand that's not giving me a message, and it doesn't have to always be a purpose-driven message. That's not what I'm saying. It's that there's a known identifier for the brand. It is something, it means something. And listen, we've worked with plenty of upstart brands too, and they're trying to create a brand. So messaging can sometimes be hard to come by, but having direction. So I look at that when I think about digital marketing. By the way, marketing for that, Meg, I always think about this idea of, you're giving me something. I need a campaign brief. I need data. I need information. I might contribute to that, right? You and I may have a conversation and say, hey, here's what I think about the messaging. And you'll say, Steve, what can you do for me in an ad? And then you'll either provide us creative, or we'll present creative to you, and we'll go back and forth on that to see how it is on brand or on point. And then we'll start leveraging that. And that's going to lead me into, I hope you appreciated that, everybody in the audience, or you're cringing on what the heck is he trying to do? So what this question is about is really what I want to bother Meg with, is to say, you know what, we talked about what brand is and means. We talked a little bit about what digital is and means. What I want to know is, how do you set a strong foundation for the brand, and why is it important? Why is it important for the company? Why is it important for the products and the brands? And then I'm going to be selfish here and say, why is it important for me?
Yeah, for me, the brand foundation is really the foundation of everything. So we were talking about Tom's, and then you threw out Air Jordans, right? And those are two very different brands, and different mission, different purpose. And you kind of alluded to this. It doesn't have to be such a strong purpose that, I'm going to solve all the world's water issues, right? But it goes back to the beginning. And I think to start a strong brand foundation is to really kind of just peel back the layer and say, why do we exist? What is our mission? What are we here to try and achieve with all of that? And a lot of times people, I find, they'll know that they need to be doing social media or PR, and they feel like it can help them get their brand awareness. But when I ask the question of awareness of what? Is it thought leadership? Is it awareness of a product? And if it is of your product, what particular attributes? And when you dig a little bit deeper, I really find that not always can those questions be answered. And so if you're thinking about setting the foundation and how do you set that foundation, it starts with pulling in that mission, answering that question of why do we exist? And if you can answer that question, then you can build an audience that can rally around it by playing into those values too, because what are values for you in a brand like REI or Patagonia, outdoors, the environment, etc., you start to attract people who believe in the environment, who are outdoors minded, who are trail runners or snowboarders, or like to get outside and camp. And you get this kind of audience that rallies behind them with you. And then if you take that a step further and say it's because of quality or the best product for possible, or just the best tent you can imagine, then you can start to really get people to rally even further and become those loyalists for you, because it's important for them, because they are looking for a brand that they can rely on and that solves kind of this problem or provides a solution in their life too. Otherwise, without that brand, there's no reason to really come back. You can get a tent from 100 other brands and you're just looking for the best deal versus a brand that has that quality that you can believe in and come back to.
I'm going to throw a challenge out. What if you are that challenger or that knockoff brand and you still want to sell 10,000 tents, or you want to sell trail gear to that same group that REI is selling to? Because I know REI is up here on that list, right? So what do I do if I'm that challenger brand? How do I come to life if I'm one of those folks?
Yeah, I love that question, because I think, the end goal is always business goals, right? Like sales, this is what helps drive a business forward. But if you lack that brand and people don't really know what to stand for, they don't know to come back to you, or why they should come back to you. And so if you're a challenger brand in the market and you don't really have a strong foundation for why you exist, you're not giving them a reason to come back to you. It's almost like you're just buying a pair of shoes to buy a pair of shoes versus buying a quality pair of shoes that once you get over that trail running and you've worn out those trail running shoes, you're going to go back and buy that brand again because you know that you love them and they work. But if you don't have a connection to that brand, you're just going to go and buy a different pair of shoes any single time, and you don't get that repeat customer for you.
This is really funny because my mother worked at Sears for almost 40 years, and I used to get Sears brand everything when I was yay high. And I can't buy shoes that aren't like that. They have to be branded shoes, because all of the Sears shoes, you're a little kid, you lace on your new shoes and you think you're faster. Well, I never was, but you put on those shoes, all those shoes, every pair she ever got me from the Sears off-label stuff was always forever causing blisters. And it was horrible. Anyway, that's my own little story there. When I think about this, I'm gonna go in here a little bit from the digital side, and I want to make an argument for, let's not strive for perfection in the brand and some of those materials that we need. Let's strive to get to a place where we think it's high quality, and that from there we can test our way into a marketplace, right? So we can test in traditional, we can test in digital, we can do this testing, and we can learn, and we can update the brand when we're done.
Yeah.
The brand, it's alive.
So yeah, I think you're like really hitting on this marketing piece really well, Steve. And I think like, I'm going to flip the script a little bit here and ask you the question of, like, how does that fit with marketing overall? Because you're on a roll talking about this. You're talking about testing, not getting the brand perfect to be able to come to life, because brands change, right? Starbucks is an example. Apple is an example. Like Apple's branding has changed over the last 20 years quite drastically, actually. So how does that fit? How do you make a brand fit with marketing overall as you come to life?
Well, you have to use those same characteristics, those elements that define a brand, whether they're affinity elements for the audience where I'm looking at demographic and psychographic information. Some brands are defined by keywords. We all know that Google won't allow me to display somebody else's trademarked keyword on Google. I can kind of bid on it at times and other things, but it's that idea that brand becomes the identifier. But if I don't have a strong identifier, I'm still going to market to try and, I want to cherry pick that traffic, right? Whether I'm on LinkedIn or I'm on Facebook or advertising, or I'm trying to work with somebody on their website, it's that idea of, what does my footprint look like compared to that competition today? What do I want it to look like tomorrow? And then really there's some expectation there when I think about that, right? So when I'm working with a client, when we're talking about, hey, I want to take over the world, is always the answer. What does success look like? Taking over the world. And you look at that and then you try to break that down into, okay, what does success really look like? What do we need to do in the next 90 days to be able to help you believe that we've all succeeded or achieved success together? So when we pull that back, it's aligning those elements that you've defined in that foundation of the brand with the digital marketing campaigns that we're building. So all of those become elements of what we're using to target users. Our job is to activate a brand or a product. Yes, we want to sell things, right? But more often than not, it's to help you activate that brand or that product. So if we're going at this and we're just running a paid media campaign and we're buying ads on Facebook and we're buying ads on Google and maybe a couple of other places, and there's not a lot of awareness going on outside of that. So I'm looking at lower funnel conversions. I'm having trouble fitting in with marketing overall because there's nothing going on above there in the funnel that supports me. So I'm trying to make you money, Meg, but you're not giving me the chance because you as a brand haven't defined enough upper funnel opportunity for me to benefit from. You haven't created that awareness that's going to get somebody to know a name of a product or the brand and click on that to come through. So flipping it back at you, what can I do if I'm the digital marketer in the situation like this? How should I approach a brand that hasn't given me enough information?
Yeah, and I love that question. I think I want to tune into this kind of idea that I was thinking about when I was thinking about the webinar this morning. I'm going to go a little bit rogue here, and I was thinking about it in terms of like a musician. And if you thought about your brand as a person, in particular, a musician or a rock star, this musician exists because, you know, like their drive in life is to create this incredible music that connects with an audience. But we all know that there's country, there's indie, there's rock, there's rap, there's so many different types of music that connects with so many types of people. So that musician tends to kind of follow where their heart and soul guides them. And they start to create music that they love. And then that's how they come to life, right? So a rock star or somebody with like a mohawk and tattoos looks different than, you know, I would assume than like an indie type of musician. And that's a big generalization, big stereotype. And so I don't mean that by any means. I mean, it's more of a
No, it's the story. It's the story.
Yeah.
You're looking at the story.
Yeah.
Each musician is a unique story. And if you will, if I can play on that for a minute, I'm taking those characteristics to try and I'm leveraging that story to help move the product. Exactly. And I hate to turn it into commerce, but really what am I doing with digital marketing? But either creating awareness or generating leads or transactions, right? So that's my job. Certainly I can bring traffic to a site for content, but that's not quite why we're here today. It's that idea that I'm taking that story and you've built me a story, right? You've worked with a brand, you've established that foundation. You've given me a story to work with, and I'm taking that mohawk and the tattoos and I'm going to market with that.
Exactly. And then that kind of keyword that you said is activate. So if we're talking about the musician and they have a concert coming up, how do we sell more of those tickets? How do we get their fans there? How do we start to drive awareness beyond their fan base? You know, they have this loyalty. How do we expand so that they get an even bigger audience and start playing at the Pepsi Center here in Denver, Allstate Arena in Chicago, like these big venues beyond just kind of your local bar area? By creating this brand that you build up to. And I think that's where this kind of fits with marketing here.
So, quick note, folks, if you've got questions as we bounce this thing back and forth, throw them in the Q&A. We'll get to as many of them at the end of the session as we can, and those that we can't get to, we will send out via email. All right, Meg, I think you're teeing me up here. Or am I just jumping in?
I'll let me
Go
run
for
with
it.
it.
Tee it up.
Because, I think this is really your area. And we've started to touch on this idea of branding and how do we start to come to life, right? Like so we have this brand, we know why we exist, we built this mission, we have this persona, our logo, the visuals, all of this, and we're like ready to rock and roll. Let's come to life. We have a strategy. What do we do next? Where does the brand then come to life through something like SEO?
All right. For those of you playing along at home, SEO is more than a website. It's more than keywords. It's more than title tags. SEO has really evolved to be, if you will, a content strategy, a keyword strategy, right? SEO used to be keywords. When I started in this business, when my hair wasn't gray and gone, we used to be able to stuff pages with keywords, and the search engines would love it. And you targeted a keyword, and you force fed these things, and you could buy links, and you could force feed links to your website. A lot has changed, right? We look at the semantic web now. We look at these things. So let's go back to that story. I'm stuck on the mohawk here and the tattoos, but I'm using that as a story. We can play with this idea of a musician, because I think everybody can sort of picture this, right? So you think about that musician. What am I going to do with that musician's website to help tell his or her story? What are the things that are going to make that come to life? There's absolutely visuals in music, right? But most people don't equate visuals with SEO. Well, we do, because we have to, right? I tell a story around the visual. If it's a video, I want a transcript, right? I want to be able to tell that story. I want to make sure my website is right. And right is a lot easier than it used to be. Most of the platforms that you're going to buy or rent today have baked in SEO. It's wonderful, right? But you can't just trust that. You've got to go to work to identify, okay, what pages do I have to mention the mohawk on? Where do I need to talk about the music, the upcoming album, the tour, the merchandise? What am I using for that? Where am I putting it? But then I can't just paint a box around my website either. I'm going to think about, what is my messaging? What is my content strategy? Is my content strategy, am I publishing articles? Am I publishing snippets of my music videos? Am I using a YouTube channel for organic? And then what am I doing in social? And this is where I want to tap into you, Meg, in terms of social media, is like expanding to organic social and generating that presence, because the website in some of these cases is that destination for some of those transactions. But where we're generating that awareness is going to be on social media. It's going to be on the Twitters of the world. It might be on a third-party website where we happen to have a video or an article that's been published as well.
Yeah, and I love that you kind of hit on social here, because YouTube is the perfect example. I want to like zero in on that example because it's part social media, of course, but also YouTube is the second, and it may have passed Google, but it's a huge search engine. So it has been for a very long time the second largest search engine, second to that of Google. And so you have this kind of natural intersection where, YouTube access SEO, but it's also a social media platform, and artists have become known.
Praise me. So glad you said that.
So it is like, it's like, how do we show up on something like YouTube or Facebook or TikTok, etc., in a way that like gets us that recognition for search, and they all work together. So digital marketing, I know you and I really align on this, is that nothing happens in a vacuum, which is why we start with this umbrella of branding as a whole, strategy as a whole, and then pull down on the different levers for SEO. But I'd love your take on kind of the YouTube SEO social mix there.
I'm going to go back up a level, because you tapped into something there to say we have to be able to leverage this stuff to build this sort of fully integrated campaign. And it's this idea that if your client or your vendor gives you a vacuum, give it back. It's this idea that I only want you to do one thing, and it's absent of strategy. Then as a vendor, as an agency, you should hand it back and ask them questions. You should break it open and you can figure out what it looks like. I want to know where the intersections are in the work that I'm doing if I'm working alongside another agency, even a web developer or a creative firm.
Yeah, I love that, because we work together as agencies. A lot of times agencies work together and towards the same goal. So as a PR agency, you can be working with a social media agency, an SEO agency, and you're all working to kind of build that business, those sales that we're talking about. But you want them to work together. And so when we do come to life, that I'm not saying something on social media that doesn't really exist on the website, and people are like, wait a second, this brand I'm seeing on social media is like half the brand on a website there. And so really bringing those together for us.
What a great segue back into social media.
Yeah.
Some of this stuff is planned, folks, some is not. Meg and I have done a couple of rehearsals and they've been absolutely wonderful. And then we chose to stop rehearsing because we didn't want too many preconceived notions in our heads, so we could let this flow a little bit. But we know we're hitting on topics. But if there's something that you think you want to hear us talk about, please drop it in the Q&A and we will absolutely get to it. So what I want to tap into next is really, I want to get into the PR and social aspect of this and thinking about, we're talking about intersections of where these different channels, if you will, I don't want to call them tactics because it's far too low for me. I'm thinking about channels and I'm thinking about, I'm working with a brand, I'm activating that brand. A lot of times there's that first message out of the gate, let's go make some money. And listen, I'm all for it. I always find that if we make customers money, they're much happier writing us checks. It's really, really wonderful how that works out. But some of the stuff we do is long game. SEO is a long game, right? I can't count your money in 30 days from SEO. Maybe in 6 months, we can start counting the money depending on the changes we've made, the content we published, etc. Organic socials the same way, right? It's really difficult to count money. From the paid media side of things, we can count money pretty easily, but assume that we've got a brand new product or a brand new brand. Well, I'm not going to break any speed records in paid media buying ads unless it's really a product that's novel, nobody else is selling it and everybody thinks it's really cool. But even that, you're getting some earned media where people are mentioning it. They're saying, hey, you know what, those new gym shoes are really amazing, those tennies are great. But forget about me talking about that. Let's think about this brand and how it interacts with PR and social and what that looks like today for the launch of a brand, or even the pushing of a brand. Maybe there's a brand already. Tell me what that looks like in your world, Meg.
Yeah, so I think you hit it a nail on the head, like not talking about tactics, right? Because putting video together on social media is the tactic of social media, which is a channel, but there's certainly multiple channels within that. And same thing with public relations. And tying this back to kind of the brand piece of this is that when you come to life on public relations and you're reaching out to a reporter, or you're writing an article for Forbes, or you're becoming a guest contributor on a blog, or joining a podcast, what is it that you're trying to say? This is why it's so critical to start with the messaging and the branding and the strategy, because if you're just there and then you have an article come out about you and you're like, well, wait a minute, this didn't sell what I wanted it to sell. This didn't talk about my new sneaker that I'm launching or the brand that I'm launching. Oftentimes it's because you haven't really found those like top 3 messages that you are going after as a brand, that it starts at when we build that foundation. And so by building that foundation, you then can decide how you show up on public relations. You can decide the voice and tone. Are you super casual? Are you super polished? Are you corporate? What does that sound like? And it resonates through public relations. It also resonates on social media, so that how you show up on social media is consistent, brand over brand. So like when we're writing copy for ads on paid media, it's similar copy to social media, and there's not a disconnect for that end user. But also, for PR and social, is that when you're doing all of this work to show up, and you have that article in Forbes, you have 100,000 followers on social media, you killed your brand launch, it doesn't just sit and live with PR and social media, it also works for SEO. So Forbes gives you that backlink power to SEO. And that's why it's super critical to have your brand messaging really aligned and that foundation set, because you don't have a disruption between the work that you do with SEO and the messaging that's coming through from Forbes on the PR lens of it.
Absolutely. It has to have personality.
Yeah.
You have to be able to send that message. And you know what? You might be a very vanilla brand or product, and that message might be very plain, and that's fine. But if it speaks to your audience and it's consistent across channels, then we have a consistent message and everybody's using the same messaging and the same characteristics to be able to advertise and market for the brand. And when we think about it that way, whether you're whether you're a punk rock star or call it a folk singer, those characteristics come to life, and they should come to life across everything that we do. And what you're speaking of, again, it's that integrated marketing approach. If each of these circles, and it might be like when you look at the Olympic rings, every little component of the digital landscape intersects with another component somewhere. They might not be fully overlapping, where like SEO and content do this, right? But so does social and content. So those three are very closely intertwined today. There's a key question about which social platform should I choose. So I don't know if you can answer that in 10 seconds or less, Meg, but maybe we'll save that for later since the buzzer just hit me.
No, I love that. And I actually think I'm going to tie this in. I'll answer it slightly and tie it into paid media for you, which is, I always suggest starting with two. There's so many, right? There's Clubhouse, there's TikTok, there's YouTube, there's Facebook, there's Instagram. It goes on, right? And they're always changing in popularity. But I think, especially if you're starting out, what I would advocate to do is really hone in on just a few channels that you feel like you can own. And then as you really get that underway and you're like, oh, this has gone from taking an hour to do one post to 10 minutes. That right. You add, right? But let's go deeper rather than wider, and really own what we're doing and show up well. And then when you have the bandwidth to kind of grow accordingly. And that's why these big, well-established brands like a Burger King or a Wendy's or Tom's or what have you can be everywhere, is because they're established. Mm-hmm. So then they get to start to choose how they show up. And to tie this kind of back to paid media, it's similar, right? There's so many different channels that you can show up on. I'll throw the question back at you. How do you show up, or how do you decide where you show up? Like, where do I put my money? Is it Google? Is it Facebook ads? Like, how do I make that decision based with the budget I have?
So budget is always going to be part of the equation, but the bigger key is what's the audience you want to target, and what is the goal of your campaign? If your gym's shoes, pun intended, and you're starting a brand that's similar to Tom's, that's very mission driven, maybe you're not doing a 1-for-1 pair, you've got some other glorious mission, and you want to start this thing, well, you're going to look at that a little bit differently than Tom's will, right? So I have to think about, who am I targeting? Maybe the audience is a little bit different. And then I'm going to roll back to budget, because budget's one of those things where everybody I talk to, a lot of the clients that you speak to, want to know how much it's going to cost, and they'll ask you on the first call. And 90% of the time, we need to do some scoping. Yeah. At BFO, we don't sell search in a cookie cutter fashion. Yes, we have minimum pricing and we have some things, but it also depends on the size and shape of the client. So it's a really, really difficult question to answer when we talk about, okay, I've got $10,000 to spend, and where should I spend it? Well, the old Sam Kinison joke would be, go where the food is. The idea is finding the food, right? Where's your audience, and are they there? And the key is, if you don't have a baseline already, if you don't have traffic and you don't have the data, well, we're going to have to do some work. We're going to have to test out a couple of channels and platforms. We might take your 10 grand, maybe we take $100,000, and we test 3 or 4 different avenues, maybe a half a dozen avenues. Even if I think about Google alone, I've got half a dozen avenues where I can spend money in Google today. And I can just point and click and send money to YouTube. I can send money to display, a bunch of different ad types. I can do these things. I can use remarketing ads. So I can spend money there, but maybe I go into programmatic display and I say, well, I've got a broader awareness campaign. So what are my goals? Are my goals to drive revenue? Are my goals to drive brand awareness? And then even for driving brand awareness, I want to know, this is me being greedy, how to measure the brand awareness. So I'm going to lean on you for this and say, because I'm really, really good at counting clicks and counting dollars and tracking leads. What I'm not the best at, and I'll freely admit it, I can put up display ads and I can get people thinking about them. And I can count impression share, but how would you go about telling folks to say, hey, listen, I need to create brand awareness. What are the measurement tools that I should be using? What are the metrics that I should be looking at so that I can take their eye off of this? Hey, I gave you $100,000 and you only made me 30,000. Well, the goal was awareness. It wasn't sales.
Yeah, yeah. And that's often, awareness is one that is, I'll say tough to measure, but it's not impossible. And that is the key here is, so when you're whether you're going through a brand refresh or you're launching a brand new brand, tying it back to kind of this idea of strategy of how do we show up, part of the research that you do is around a competitive audit. And we're seeing where our competitors are, how are they showing up in the marketplace? And you want to look at that share of voice as a part of it. What's our visibility? And there are plenty of tools out there that can help you do that. So yes, we're looking at impressions, we're looking at reach, we're looking at engagements, so if we're reaching 100,000 people, but only 3 people are clicking on a social media post, is that really effective? Maybe on the awareness side, but it might not be the
How many likes can you get me?
Right. And so you might have like this really incredible reach and awareness, but you might not see that like direct connection to sales at the end of the day, because awareness is the very top of the funnel that you're bringing people down into.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at things like share of voice, visibility, reach, engagement, and these are similar for paid media too, but how do you carry that through to the website? Clicks and actions that people are taking. I think just to pull that together is, from that awareness, how many people become loyal and customers tells us really how effective we're being over time as well.
And I'm gonna stay there for a minute too and think about, there's a long game here. And it's this idea of, regardless if you're an established brand or a new brand, there's a long game to making changes or improvements in your brand strategy and your digital marketing strategies. And to think about it, yes, we always want to make money, but make sure that you're managing expectations about where the dollars are going and what results you expect from those dollars. If you put $100,000 into a marketing budget and you expect a 5x return on ad spend, well, I've got maybe unrealistic expectations about that. Maybe there's a channel that'll get me a 7 times return on ad spend, but maybe when we're talking about sort of programmatic, which is really awareness, I'm not really going to see a huge return on ad spend, but I'm going to see a long tail on this in terms of awareness for my brand. And that's going to pay dividends longer term as I start seeing that foundation of recurring traffic grow and those transactions grow that you spoke of. And that's key in all of this, to make sure that you're always adding bricks or concrete, if you will, to your foundation, so that you're strengthening your foundation, so that the next time you want to do something new or different, you've got a stronger foundation to launch from.
Yes, yes. And I love that. And I'll blend this into this question of the impact of the pandemic on brand and digital marketing here to kind of keep us moving in this PTI format. But it is that we saw like total disruption and chaos in 2020 when it came to brands who never swore they would up and down they'd never do digital marketing, all of a sudden had to do
People that made all their money in conferences did do it all online now.
Exactly. And brands that weren't well known became popular overnight. But there was also kind of the struggle on the other end of small businesses that really struggled because they didn't have this brand or loyalty. And you did see a lot of people going to local restaurants to help them out, to spend their money there. And so I think when I'm thinking about the world of brand and digital marketing, I'd love your perspective on, what's the impact that the pandemic had on both brand and digital marketing and the businesses that are playing in the space.
So I'm going to stick to the small business aspect, and I think about pizza places, I think about large chains, and I think about local folks. The first wave of the pandemic saw everybody shut down, and the technologists and the marketers got together and said, how can we help? And they updated apps, they built tools. So I like Slice the Pizza app, works with local pizza places, right? Now, bigger pizza joints, your Domino's and your Little Caesars have apps and all the drive-bys, they have all the bells and whistles already. But the little people, the mom and pop pizza places didn't have anything. They had telephones still. And we're all on our phones because we became more and more digital. It's this idea that the world isn't going back. And a good friend of mine said, I'm not sure if what we did is we pulled the world from 2016 into 2021 because we had to, or we jumped ahead to 2025. One of those two things is true, but it doesn't matter which. It's this idea that the convenience and the ease of the technologies that we're using now is better than it was 18 months ago, 2 years ago. In a lot of cases, listen, not all your technologies are great by any stretch, but all these apps and all these utility items that we use now, there's no going back. I was picking up Thai food the other day, and it was raining in Chicago, and this little hole in the wall Thai restaurant was never busy. Like before the pandemic, there were always a couple of people in there, and it's one of the most wonderful Thai restaurants in Chicago. I walked in just to pick up some carry out, and there were 4 tables filled with delivery orders. Each table designated for a delivery service to come and get it. One was their driver, the other one was like Uber Eats. It was like all these different tables set up. So I imagine their business through the pandemic has really grown in that way. And I think that the ease of technology, and I'm going to bring this back to brand and marketing here just for a second, and then I'll give you a chance to chime in on the same question, because I know you've seen some of this stuff too. It's this idea that brands are supported by these apps that aggregate them. Slice is one of those apps where I can order from a local pizza place. I can pick my favorite or my new. If it's a chain you're ordering from, you're going to have to use their app. And there's a few other apps that do this, certainly. But it's this idea that you've got a brand now, Slice, sitting above Joe's Pizza and Pasta, who's helping Joe sell more pizza during the pandemic. And now as the pandemic's slowing and growing and whatever the pandemic is doing, still helping Joe sell pizza. But there's a brand here and Joe fits into that ecosystem. It's really this cool idea. So I'm curious what you think about Joe fitting into that ecosystem and about other brands who've taken advantage of this.
Yeah, I love that example of the Thai restaurant that you shared, because it's not that if you don't have a brand or do digital marketing well that you're going to lose. It's that by leaning into a brand and digital marketing and taking that emphasis and really owning it is that you can really win. So then the case of this Thai restaurant, they might be doing more takeout orders by using digital media than they would be able to even support in restaurant, right? Because you have limited number of seating when they're a small place. And so I think by leaning into digital marketing as a business, you can really start to leverage things like app, TikTok, social media,
oh, yeah.
paid media, etc., to grow your brand and get that awareness. And you see it. I'm going to talk about TikTok. You're talking about Slice. TikTok blew up over quarantine. Like it
absolutely.
I'm obsessed with it. I am like, I have to limit my time on it, but what you see is people actually building brands because of TikTok.
Right.
And so they're going at it the reverse way, where they're like, oh, I have this business idea, or I want to be a consultant, or whatever it may be, and they go on TikTok and they're just documenting their life. They're telling a story, and they're starting to build a brand from the ground up in a way that they weren't able to do without that digital marketing.
Well, and the cool thing there is the pandemic forced us all online even more. And so the idea that an audience may have grown by 10x for somebody who was maybe a fringe TikToker before, but now they're a full-blown influencer, right? So brands are reaching out to them now to say, hey, can I get product placement for this or that? Or they just love products and they push them, and it turns out to be a wonderful thing for them, and it's a wonderful thing for the product or the brand.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful.
I couldn't agree more with that.
Oh,
I know we're moving on to kind of the Q&A section. I saw a question come through that I'd love to kind of hit on, because I have a pandemic related example that worked with. And the question is, how would you address dealing with a client who always has a fire demand strategy for a campaign that is to be launched in 5 hours? And to me, if I'm reading a little bit between the lines, it's like, how do you balance this idea of needing to move the business forward today while setting the pace for a brand long haul, or they want to kind of grow, but they have so many moving pieces. How do you kind of take the strategy and weave it in? And we had a client of ours who actually had a solution for some things around COVID. And it was part of the reason they got into digital marketing, which was really cool. And I was really honored to be able to do something and to work with a brand who could do something during that time. But we were simultaneously building a brand and marketing strategy as we were supporting their kind of COVID goals and business there. And so for me, it was really about pulling them in and saying, hey, we can do this. Let's get started. Let's pull in what's the messaging. What are these kind of core elements that make up a brand or digital marketing strategy?
Mhm.
We pulled them in to set that foundation, and then we started the marketing. And then at the same time, we took a similar track where like, but we still highly recommend a larger digital marketing strategy for the entirety of the brand, because once the pandemic passes and this goes away, is you're still going to have a brand to show up.
Absolutely.
And it's not tied to that.
I want to go back to that and go back to something we talked about earlier about how do you spend the money? How do you decide where to put it? It comes down to that strategy and where it is that you think the opportunities are. And I liken it to having a fish finder, right? I can put a bunch of different types of fishing poles in the water and I can try to catch a bunch of different fish. But if I know what I'm doing, I can catch a certain kind of fish. It's this idea that understanding where a brand wants to be and when, I can start backing into this idea of no bad ideas, right? It's an open brainstorming session. What could we or should we do? This is a place where I get to throw my digital ideas at the brand. I get to throw traditional ideas at the brand. I get to throw off the wall ideas at the brand, because all you're trying to do in this strategic planning session is break the thinking open so that people will share, oh, let's go sponsor a golf outing, which was, completely foreign concept to everybody involved. But, maybe like, hey, you know what, there's a tie in here because of this and this. And all of a sudden, you're sponsoring this golf outing and you're inviting your best clients to whatever the case may be. You come up with these ideas, but then ultimately you prioritize those opportunities and say, what do we think of these opportunities? And you go and you score those. You score the opportunities, then you invest in those opportunities from the top down. And you figure out where your favorite one is, where your next favorite. You might run out of money at some point, but you're trying those things and you're figuring out what everybody wants to be working on and trying to make sense of it. I think we're being bumped by Maina with questions.
Thanks, Steve and Meg. We kind of jumped right into questions there, but just wanted to pause for a second. I wanted to apologize again for the technical glitch earlier, and also that we haven't been able to get the closed captioning up. We do take that seriously, and apologies for that, and we will have that in place definitely moving forward. Okay, let's move on to the question answer. We had the first question kind of come in, and Meg and Steve took that one. Please feel free to submit additional questions, and we also have some pre-submitted questions that we'll have Meg and Steve get to as well. So another question came in. What types of tools do you recommend using in the brand development process, or what type of strategies do you use in helping a business to determine their mission, statement, and messaging?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Steve, and then I'll ask you to chime in as well. But
I'm saying not it.
Yeah. But from a brand development process and when building a brand strategy is kind of twofold. I think about it quantitatively, and qualitatively. And the qualitative side is from the start, we do a really deep dive 90-minute session, and it winds up almost always jumping into a follow-up 60-minute session. And we have structured in place questions that's kind of go back to the beginning. They ask the question of like, what is your story? Like, tell us why we started, tell us all the business goals. And we start to really gather important information about the brand that we don't get from the outside looking in. And then so that it's not just kind of like randomized and we're like making stuff up out of thin air, is we look at a lot of research and data. And so there are listening tools out there that you can go in and you can see what people are talking about from a cultural perspective, from a category perspective, from a consumer perspective, and about your brand. And when you're kind of look at it from all these different lenses coming in, you can say what's happening as a culture, as a society, in the marketplace, what's happening in this particular sector that we are in, the restaurant industry, for example, and then what's happening around our brand in addition to that? What are people saying and seeing that they're missing? And so we take all of this data that we kind of mine out and find, and we take that story and we look for these gaps, or what we will call a white space, an opportunity to differentiate ourselves that also resonates to the core and heart and soul of our organization. And it's in that white space that we really live. But one of the tools we also use as part that you can do is SEMrush is a great tool. There's a lot of keyword tools that Steve's team is very familiar with, where you can use for listening, and you can start to see, like, through SEO and through search, a lot of things kind of bubble up to the top of those gaps. And so, Steve, I'll invite you in to answer from kind of a marketing strategic perspective of how do you guys pull in that strategy and that vision together, like from that data-centric mindset?
So it's taking that. So we're not going to be the folks that help you define your vision and your mission. What we're going to do is to help you translate that into goals and objectives. And in terms of using the tools to figure out where you want to be, there are a host of tools. SEMrush is one. There's a lot of other, Ahrefs is one we use. There's tools like Conductor. There's a lot of other free tools that are out there, but there's some really good paid tools. There's one that I love for content work. And it's content beyond just seeing what keywords rank for. It's also content in terms of what the search engine results might look like. And forgive me, everybody, I can't think of the name of it. And when Meg tipped onto this subject, I tried to look right quick and I couldn't grab it. It's on the tip of my tongue. Maybe one of the if one of the SEOs from our team is on the line, they can throw it in Slack for me, and I'll come up with it before we close. But otherwise, look for it in the email next week.
Okay, here is a pre-submitted question. What should I start with when I first start into digital marketing? SEO or paid media?
Strategy. I'm gonna go back up, and so there's a good reason to make sure your website is in good working order. There's no doubt, right? But you may have a need to make money day one. So paid media might be a great answer for you, but if your website grades out at like a C or less in your brain, I don't know that I'd send paid traffic there. I'd send it to a landing page, or I'd use a tool like ClickFunnels, and I'd build a funnel sequence so that I can convert my users with that messaging. So it depends on your needs immediately. If you've got time and you're going to be in the long game here, then SEO and getting the site right. If you need to make money from day one, make sure you have a website, and make sure the look and feel is relatively consistent with the landing pages, but build a landing page with a compelling offer, drive traffic there, convert that traffic. If you need the money, we all need the money, don't get me wrong. But if the idea is that people really need to spend a lot of time with, let's say, your product, or it's a really complex sale, then your website might need a little more love along the way, because people are going to be digging around. Anybody ever tried to navigate the Intel website?
Yeah.
Oh, built by engineers, managed by engineers, cursed at by everybody else. There's no rhyme or reason. Please, if anybody from Intel is on the phone, don't throw things at me. But it's this idea that it's really, really hard to navigate and find what you want on that website. It's this idea, but it's huge because a lot of what they sell can be very, very complex. So it's this idea that, if you've got a really complex sale, now make sure it's organized well, but your website may come first. So I hate to not answer that question, but it's really a question of what you really need to accomplish and when.
Great. Thank you for Steve. Thanks for that. I think with that, we're right at time. So just a couple items in closing. If you want to chat or need help from a digital marketing perspective, Steve's email is on the screen. It's steve@befoundonline.com. If you want to talk brand, you can reach out to Meg directly at meg@hackettbrandconsulting.com. Our next webinar will be at the end of September 30th at 12 p.m.